I will be in a lecture from 10:25 to 11:30 or 12. So मैं अभी miss करूँगा, but I'll catch up with you.
No problem. No problem. Okay, certainly. I'll just tell you. I'll just tell you a little the plan for today, just so you know what I plan to do. So I will work. This will be about co-creating solutions with communities.
Right.
And I plan to cover the 6-year journey our work on water contamination has taken to come from initial exploration to currently that postable wand which can do the trace contaminants detection. हाँ, अरे अर्थफेस एनालिटिक्स बना रहे हैं कंपनी.
क्या बात है, क्या बात है, क्या बात है, मजा आ गया. Friends, you may not know, but Chintan will tell you. But the idea, if the rudiment of the idea is that, imagine that if out of 650,000 villages, each village having, let us say, 5 wells, and if they want to know the quality of water of each well periodically, they just send a letter with a stamp which is vetted with the water of the well. So let's say there are 5 wells, village number 1, V1, W1, V1, W2, V1, W3, and so on. And then they put the stamp on the letter, send it to the water testing authority of the country. And that water, which will have contaminants, used for pasting it on the paper, can be used. I mean, it will be dried, of course, by that time. Could be used to give the report to them as to whether the well water is drinkable or not, or washable, whatever quality it has. That was the rudiment, and I'm so proud of Chintan, what he's going to tell you today. I will miss it, but I will listen to this recording later on. This is a remarkable work that Chintan you have done. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And I want to say, I want to add just one thing. आप जाएं उसके पहले कि we were able to get to a device that not only can be posted, but by using the device, water is decontaminated to the extent where the water itself becomes potable.
You mean to, oh my God. You mean the well water?
The well water, which has trace contaminants, by putting this device, it is like वो छाछ बनाते हैं ना वो रवाई से. ऐसा device है. It is a small छाछ बनाने वाला device.
A churning device.
A churning device. And when you churn, in 10 seconds you can absorb 95 to 98% of trace contaminants. So water itself becomes potable, and then you take out the wand, send it by post, and you can recreate the sample in the lab for you to test.
And very low cost.
And less than around less than 2 rupees at scale.
Yeah.
So we'll tell them.
Wonderful. And I look forward to catch up with you, and with the story, I will listen to it and then get back to you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye. So I'll be uploading my presentation now. Let's see. Okay, uploading now. How's everyone doing? Oh, I see. It says file too long, split it into multiple files. Okay, I'll have to save it as something so that it takes it. Let us see. Okay, maybe this will work. Let us see. Okay, uploading about 50% done. Okay, almost there. Maybe coming up. Let us see. Okay, currently a blank screen. Let's see if it shows up with my presentation. I'm certainly hoping it will. Okay, still a blank screen. Not sure what's going on. Can somebody give me a signal whether they are hearing me or not?
सर
Yes.
शायद वो
Presentation आ रहा है. It has been uploaded. It tells me. You think you see it on your end, or is there a way you can see it on your end?
no.
Okay. Okay, it's currently, so, you know, after the upload, it goes into this blank navy blue screen, and then usually it comes up with a presentation. Last time that is what had happened.
You can manage the. You can share your screen and then make the presentation at your end. That might be easier. So you can change it yourself. You upload the presentation and change it. You select the screen. Have you shared the screen?
Okay. All right. Yes, I'm back. I was.
So what I'm saying, you can upload the presentation and you can share your screen.
Yes, I think sharing my own screen may work better. Let's see.
Yes, that may be better. That may be better.
Let's see.
You can change it as you wish.
I don't have the share screen option.
No. You will have. I have made you. Let me make it again. You are the presenter now, so you should have it.
Okay, because usually it shows. Okay, now I see it.
Yes.
Okay, let us see. Select a screen. Okay, trying to do that. Let's see. Just 1 minute. ST Summer School. My presentation does not really show up here. If you like to see screen. Okay, struggling. Hold on just 1 minute. One more try. Okay, that's that. That's that. All right, let me see if this works. Okay, okay. I'm trying to share my screen. Is it coming through by chance? Okay, it's thinking. Okay, I think I see that it has come through.
Yes.
All right, perfect, perfect. I'm going into full screen. Do you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, so let's get started. Today I will talk about co-creating solutions with communities. As I was mentioning earlier, when Professor Gupta was introducing me, that this has been about 6 years journey, and it's into its 7th year. And so I want to tell you one such journey. There are several such journeys that I could tell you about, but this is one that will also relate to some of the research that you all are doing, because I heard about water related research the last time we were talking. Let's see. Okay, one question here. If I don't remain in the full screen mode, oh, I see. You don't see the full screen then. You just see my application entire window. So, okay, so full screen is better. I don't have any feedback from you when I do this full screen, so that's why I was asking. Okay, so that's the. So I'm going to tell you a story about one project. Now, this project interestingly started sometime in. It must have started sometime around. In my mind, it started sometime around 2007 or so. I mean, I think Professor Gupta was visiting Boston from his innovation meeting at NASA, where this whole idea of, can we not use post offices that are so ubiquitous and can reach every individual in our country, every single person in every village, can we not use them for innovation? So when he came here, he was discussing this with me, and several ideas came up. Can we not do testing of anemia for women and so on? And we also connected with the then Postmaster General of Kerala, Mr. Uday Balkrishnan. And I got very excited about it. I can still remember when in the morning me and Professor Gupta were having tea and we were talking about this. But the the hard part was I didn't know what chemistry would work here, right? I mean, it was a great concept, but didn't know whether a postcard can be turned into an anemia sensor or a postcard can be turned into something else or whatever. But that whole idea remained in my mind. And then I also had mentioned it to some other friends at MIT, and one of them was Professor Rohit Karnik, and both of us were excited about it. And we would look for chemistry ways in chemistry to do something like this, right? And so then we started, I think in around 2012, we started some work in villages and began to understand challenges of agriculture and water more systematically and so on. And so this idea we wrote into a proposal that we will use the postal service to do something for water, let's say. And there was also another sort of epiphany that we had along the way. Basically, we had realized that, in healthcare, one of the revolutions has been what is called the dry blood spotting. So when infants are born and you want to know whether they have any genetic disorders or they had any genetic disorders, you need a blood sample. But in remote areas, there's really no facility to store blood in, cold storage or there's no cold chain leading to villages. And so the idea that solved that problem of preserving an infant's blood sample was to use a blotting paper like device, a cellulose device, a paper on which you put a drop of blood, and then it can be stored for years together. And it solved this problem of cold chain. We thought, wow, that's fascinating. Maybe we could do something similar. And so those were some floating ideas with which we kind of wrote up a proposal, right? And then so that was around 2013-ish. 2014 is when we actually started on working on this idea. So as I mentioned to you the last time we were talking, that my own work is really motivated from the perspective as to how can we avoid gross inequality, which we have come to endure in the material world, in the information world. So, in the material world, you see great inequalities. I mean, do we have to endure that same inequality in the information world? Can we do something so that we don't end up with similar inequalities? That's kind of the overarching framing of my work. So one of the information inequality from that perspective is, okay, how good is my water, right? We don't know a lot of times. I mean, many of us who live in urban areas and have purifiers probably don't have to worry about it. But most of the people don't know how good their water is. The only thing they can tell by is that they can smell or taste or see the color or whatever. But beyond that, the knowledge is limited. So that was one of the information asymmetries that I was interested in going after. So what I want to do first is I want to give you some framing of, let's see. Okay, so you can see me. Can you guys see my video as I talk, or even though I go into full screen mode? Gayatri is typing. Okay. Just so I know whether this is yes. Okay, fantastic, very good, very good. So I will keep waving my hands because I can't stop waving my hands. So anyway, I want to do a little bit of framing here, right? So you may know about Pasteur's quadrant. So imagine you put the rigor of the research or the quest for fundamental understanding of something on the y-axis, going from low to high, and you put the relevance of that work on the x-axis, going from low on the left hand to high on the right hand. Then you end up with 4 different possibilities. In the top left corner is research which is pure basic research. This is research purely about understanding nature of things, understanding the nature. So there, the quest for fundamental understanding is very high, but there is no consideration for use at the time. Some 20, 30, 40 years later, it may come into use, but there is little consideration for use at the time. That is Niels Bohr's quadrant. Then diametrically opposite is the pure applied research quadrant, where the knowledge is already generated. You are trying to come up with some use of this knowledge. Many of you might feel that your current work in this summer school is in this quadrant, right? The knowledge is there. You're trying to come up with some use of this knowledge. That's pure applied research. That's the Edison's quadrant. Then at the top right corner is the use-inspired basic research, where there is quest for fundamental understanding, but you are seeking that understanding, knowing fully well that there is some use of this knowledge. And so in our case, we are roughly, the example that I'm going to show you is roughly here. It is both sort of use-inspired research and sort of applied research. So just this quadrant, the fourth one, is not really very attractive because it's neither rigorous nor relevant. So that we will leave that out, right? Okay. Then let me show you another framework. So I call this framework CPR for engineers, or compassion, practice, and research for engineers. So this is a three-dimensional plane, three-dimensional space. So imagine the three-dimensional space like this. So on each axis, there is a fundamental question, right? On the compassion axis, the fundamental question is, how deeply can I experience the problem of the intended beneficiary? So whoever's problem you're trying to solve, how deeply can you experience? I mean, do you have the tools to experience their problems deeply? Now, there is, of course, limit to this, right? If you are a cancer researcher, let's say, you don't want to have cancer to experience it, obviously. But you still need the tools to understand the grief of a cancer patient, for example, right? So that's one axis. Once you have understood the problem, then on the research axis, the question is, how do I know that what is rigorous research and learn how to do it? Right? This is the job of a university. I mean, they are very good at it. They are very good at teaching research and teaching what is good research and giving people tools to do it and so on. On the practice axis, the fundamental question is, how can I think like a seasoned practitioner, be it an entrepreneur or a policymaker or a person running an NGO or whoever is your practitioner that you're trying to become or trying to propel this idea through. And so you want to learn tools on all of these three axes. Again, easy way to remember: CPR, compassion, practice, research. And then on each axis, the progression happens through experience. If you look at the top left corner, the experience, research, and realization. So you experience the problem, you apply some research tools, and then you manifest, you realize something along that axis, right? Now that's also easy to remember because it stands for ERR, which means on each axis you have to err a lot before you can actually arrive at an answer. So think about this. So the experience on each axis. So let me populate this. So on compassion axis, you start by experiencing and learning from communities whose problem you're trying to solve. That really is the best way to learn. It's much more powerful than reading 1,000 books. You know, there's a Chinese proverb that walking 1,000 miles is better than reading 1,000,000 books. This is exactly the same thing, right? Once you have learned from communities what their challenge is, to do that, how do I do that? The research tools for doing that come from human-centered design, anthropology, social science research, some of which I'll talk about today. But that's where the tools for this research come from. And how do I realize that I did something interesting on the compassion axis? In our work, we think that you realize that you have arrived on the compassion axis when you are doing something socially conscious or economically, environmentally, culturally sustainable in its implementation. And when you begin to make trade-offs between maximizing profit versus maximizing sustainability or impact, I'm not saying you make losses. I'm just saying that instead of purely maximizing profit, can you compromise the profit just a little bit so that you will do something socially conscious? That's when you have, when people, students start to make those choices, is when you realize that you have arrived on that axis. Okay, so that's the compassion axis. The research axis, it starts by learning from researchers and the literature. So, I mean, in universities, labs, for instance, if you're part of a lab, you learn from other researchers. You learn from library literature and so on. The methodologies are dependent on what problem you're trying to solve. If you're in science, you have certain scientific experimentation methodologies. Engineering, it's as its own systems, social sciences, and so on. And the realization on research axis is in peer-reviewed publications or thesis or and so on, right? So this is a very well-established axis, right? Universities know how to do it well. The practice axis starts by learning from partners and prior art. So what solutions exist? Where are the gaps? What do partners really want? So in our projects, for example, we force students to have a solid partner on the ground who has a skin in the game for solving when it comes to solving the problem this student is trying to solve. Because it's typically that partner who will knock some sense in the student's head saying, you may be very smart technically, but this will not work here, that will work here, all of that, right? What kind of tools do you have available? So you can learn from empirical cases, you can learn from entrepreneurship and policy tools, policy analysis tools. So these tools are available. So you can learn how to progress on this axis using these tools. And then finally, when do you know you have realized something on practice axis? Generally, you know it when you have licensed something, or you've turned into a startup, or you have provided a tool or decision support to a policymaker, you have created a policy change, you have produced advisory that NGOs can use. Basically, some form of output that actually begins to impact lives, and that's when you have arrived on practice axis. So what happens is, as a journey, everyone starts closer to the intersection of the three axes here, right? And then you're kind of moving out into this three-dimensional space on each axis. That's the kind of journey that one wants to imagine. Okay, why don't I halt there and ask people, are there any questions? Any thoughts? Philosophically, we can just keep going. That's also fine. No. Sounds like we keep going. I'm not seeing anybody pop up, so fine. Let's do that. Okay. So now let me give you an example of information, what I call the IA4D, or the information architecture for development. So along this concept, I've built many solutions, but I'll give you one example here. Right? The one thing that I also, again, in terms of the backdrop, I want to tell you is that the structure of this interdisciplinary work that I am about to show you is really, it really rests upon disciplinary pillars. So imagine that if I combine research questions in pure science and engineering with research questions in systems, with research questions in social science, some combination of this leads to producing something that some solution where action, being able to take action, is the emergent property. In other words, I'm not interested in research for just the sake of research. I'm interested in research so that there can be action. Right? Okay. So that's, again, another big backdrop. So the information architecture for development that as I envision it, is that at the bottom layer, there is some form of information generation that needs to happen, right, about this situation. A lot of this can happen through development of sensors. For example, in my work, I've been working on point of use soil testing sensor. That's information generation, basically. once you've generated that information, then there's a question of how do I share this information? So there again, there could be innovation. And the example today I'm going to show you of dry sampling is a novel way of sharing information, which we haven't explored before, right? And then finally, how do you make equitable decisions? So I've done a bunch of work in urban governance in terms of balancing efficiency and privacy and so on. But now that there's this new information being shared, can you make equitable decisions? Because if you can't, then basically why share this information? So that closing the loop so that the situation itself improves also requires research, right? So these three slices is what I think of as information architecture for development. Again, in different scenarios, different pieces are already available. So you don't have to build them. You can build the rest and so on, right? So let's look at one example of information sharing and decision support in water, looking at dry sampling of water contaminants and data for improved governance in water, sanitation, and health. Okay, this work is funded by several entities at MIT and is now an active conversation with several collaborators at IIT Kanpur and so on. Ahmedabad University also, students played a role in this, which I will point out to later. So let me see. Let me do one thing. Let me take a pause and then. So Vigneshwari, this example is for you because I was asking you to do hierarchical decomposition, okay, for your waste management of ocean waste problem. Okay, so take a look. Okay, so water is a colossal space. I mean, there is really nothing that water doesn't touch when it comes to our lives, right? So what is a colossal space? How do you slice and pick a problem that is meaningful? So think about water. See, one way to think about water is to think about challenges. What kind of challenges are there? One is at the highest level, there is a question of, do you have sufficient water? If not, there are a bunch of challenges. If you have water, is it good quality water? If not, do you have a way to purify it? Each of this is a research area, right? Even in quality itself, if you go, you say, okay, what kind of quality issues can there be in water? There are three types. There's the biological contamination, which is basically the bacteria and viruses and E. coli and whatever, There's the physical contamination, which is, really the physical matter that can get into water. And then there's the chemical contamination. So now chemical contamination itself may be geogenic, or it comes from the earth, or it can be anthropogenic. This comes from human activities, right? And that again breaks down into many things, but I've just listed a few: arsenic, fluoride, nitrate, whatever you want. So each of these branch has sub branches here. So this is one way to look at water, right? Other way to look at water is geography. So say, okay, is this about groundwater? Is it a problem about groundwater? Is it about surface water? Is it about urban water? Is it about rural water? Is it about peri-urban water because cities are growing at the peripheries? That's another way to slice water. One more way to slice water is to think about water use and water pollution. Okay, do you have any irrigation water, in agriculture? Is it industrial effluents polluting water? Is it domestic water pollution, gray water used for growing vegetables, whatever. So there is the use and pollution angle. This is one way to slice it. There's the water and health angle. You could say, well, is it about sanitation? Is it about drinking water quality? Is it about the waterborne diseases? So water and health connection. So there are lots of different angles to water, right? What is interesting is that different disciplines claim different parts of this puzzle. So for example, groundwater people, civil engineering people will claim the groundwater problem. Chemistry people will claim the chemical contamination water problem. And health people may claim the waterborne diseases problem, and so on. But the interesting thing is that the water itself is agnostic to all of this, right? I mean, the groundwater becomes, it's the surface water that becomes groundwater. It's really often rural and urban spaces share the same river, and so there's that issue, upstream, downstream issues, whatever. But this, so water in some ways is like an interconnected, colossal space, right? So the decomposition is one way to then, so in our case, we said, we're going to look at, so at MIT, if you look at water related work, all of these circles represent different groups working on different parts of the challenge. For our challenge that we're going to talk about, we thought we will work on water quality issues. And because we were trying to detect the quality from the get-go as a part of our proposal, right? But we didn't do anything beyond that. We just said, we'll work on water quality. Let's see what problems there are. But one thing I want you to pay attention to, Vigneshwari and everybody else who wants to use this kind of hierarchical clustering. See, these sub categories, or the parent category and the child categories here. The child categories are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. What I mean by that is they are independent. They are not overlapping. Sufficiency problems do influence quality problems, but they can be thought of separately. Quality problems and purification problems are related, but can be thought of separately. So they are mutually exclusive, and they are collectively exhaustive, meaning there is, when you look at all three categories, that represents all of the challenges related to drinking water, for example. So they need to be collectively exhaustive, so they need to cover everything, but each branch needs to be mutually exclusive. Okay, so be careful about that. Okay, all right. So then, so we said we're going to work on quality, and so here's a little bit of flashback. So what I'm going to show you in the rest of the session is basically what the journey has been. As to how we use the field work to determine the design priorities of this solution we were going to work on. So we had started by, some people, students who were interested in building sensors, and then of course there were the local stakeholders on the ground. So imagine that this line is the lab, top line, bottom line is the field. Okay, so in the lab, before we arrived at the field, we did a lot of literature work to understand what are the potential analytes that can be built, for which we can build a sensor, who are the potential users, all of that. And then we built a whole bunch of, very rigorous tools before arriving at in the field, which were, unstructured interviews or some design workshops, so that we can uncover some or the other aspect. Depending on what we were trying to uncover, we had a full package of who we are going to talk to and what are we going to ask them, right? So we went to these stakeholder meetings and workshops. I'll show you some examples of that. And then that basically showed us this from the field. What are the likely use cases? What gets done? What does not get done? Where the gaps are, so that we could pick a gap. Once we picked a gap, we could investigate the technical feasibility of it. In other words, can we actually, do we know enough to bridge this gap? I mean, do we have technological capability to bridge this gap? So we came up with these feasible options. Once we had the options, depending on different problems take different methods, but one such method we have used is conjoint analysis. This is marketing people use to understand user preferences. So we have shown them various options, design options, and we have asked them to pick from it, just to know that what exactly are the features that they care for in a solution like this. Once we knew the user priorities, we selected the technologies to go after. We created mock-up prototypes, and then have done user testing. So that has been the sort of journey of this work. So can I ask? Well, first of all, let me ask: am I boring you? Say no. So can I ask people? Can I ask people to think about 5 to 10 stakeholders for their own project, and we'll have some people listed off. Okay. So let's take 3 minutes and 3 to 5 minutes and write down 5 to 10 stakeholders for this solution that you are trying to create, whom you would want to speak to. Not individual their names I don't want, their category, what type of stakeholders you would want to speak to. So who is a stakeholder is the first question, right? The answer is a stakeholder is somebody who is either influenced by the solution you are going to build or influences the solution you are going to build, right? Either they are influenced by or they influence your solution, how you will design. Can you make a list for your projects? And then we'll pick up in 3 to 5 minutes. All right. Good. Do we have a few volunteers to say two things? What problem are they working on, and what is the list of their stakeholders? Okay,
Sir?
Muthu. Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I am Vigneshwari, and
Vigneshwari, go ahead.
Our topic was pollution, waste management from there. But
Yeah.
Anil sir had guided us to not work on that. It is very vast. So he guided us like to work on COVID waste, because hospitals know how to dispose the infected waste, but not the people. Put everything, every mask, gloves, and etc. in dustbin,
Sure.
and the workers are getting now infected. So make something project like it will help a garbage collector. So stakeholders in our project is like transport, people who transport garbage, garbage collectors, people which are working on waste management, government, and many companies also are there who are working on medical waste disposal. So they are our stakeholders.
Okay. Okay. What about patients?
Sir, also I would like to add in her, we are in the same group. So the government, the police, garbage pickers, NGOs, and the housing societies will be our stakeholder for once the project is built.
Okay. So now I think one of the observations here is that so pick for the government, for example, government is too broad a category, so pick the agency within the government, department within the government that you would specifically speak to. So then essentially what you then want to do is you want to arrive at who are those people, like the names and phone numbers who you could speak to. So in our case at MIT, what we have been doing is, well, if students are going to the field, obviously they go meet people, but otherwise we have them cold call people. So it's like a sales person just cold calling, say, can I speak to you about this problem? So so just make it from here, make the category narrow enough that you know who to call. Okay. Let's take one more example and then we'll move further.
Yes,
Amreen, go ahead.
sir, our project is on crop culture, crop disease detection and rectification.
Yeah.
So the stakeholders which we have listed here are farmers, horticulturists, pathologists, food sellers, agriculture scientists, and even we can go with the general consumers, because they also face these challenges, like with the rotten vegetables and fruit.
Right. So again, bring it one more level lower. For example, which types of farmers? Are we interested in? In terms of which crops they grow, are we interested in a smallholder farmer versus a medium-sized farmer versus a large, sophisticated farmer? So in the pathologist, again, there'll be sort of a plant pathologist. And so on. So go from where you are to sort of slightly narrower, so that you begin to know who to go after. Nitish, you're going to say something?
Yes, sir. Sir, for my SODIS project, the probable people who can look into it or buy it would be the villagers who are actually having this water problem, clean drinking water problems. Second would be government bodies, especially who are working on just drinking water availability in their nation. Third would be NGOs who are involving in the again water drinking availability. Next would be local bodies, and then maybe World Health Organization or EPA, and especially African and Asian countries who want bacteria and microbial contamination-free drinking water.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now, in your case, again, for the summer school, I think it will be important to pick some people you can actually reach and who together represent the whole picture. So for you, I think what I will present will probably be of use, because we had a similar challenge that we were going after. I know Devesh and Ayush have also sort of are trying to speak. Are you guys trying to speak?
Yes, sir. Basically,
Okay, there's a lot of echo.
yeah. Just a second, sir.
Yeah.
Now it's clear.
Clear but feeble. Why don't you go, Devesh?
Yes, sir. Sir, we are working on a problem where we are connecting the farmers to the consumer through an digital platform.
Yeah.
Our aim is to minimize the monopolistic and long supply chain, so that the benefit of goes directly to the farmers and to the consumers in terms of economy.
Yeah.
So our stakeholders would be farmers, then agricultural exports, and then the local consumers for which we are targeting the application, and then transportation sector people for getting the information regarding dynamic pricing also, if we want to do that, and then application developers, and then social welfare worker or peoples who are expert in taking sampling and surveys, so that we can get exact survey of what we are doing. And then there is agricultural experts and agricultural officers who can be very helpful to us as a stockholder, in which we can communicate with them and get inputs.
Yeah. So now, will you? Does this include the current monopolistic supply chain that you are trying to replace? Are you also going to speak to what you are going to replace?
No, sir. I plan. I'm not going to deal with that, because that is a sort of stagnated. There, people are much more interested in monopolistic way. So I will be dealing with all those other vendors, other parties that are involved here. So I am planning to involve like transportation sector segregatedly, and then farmers, and then consumers, so that it will be targeting the rural areas, especially rural areas and nearby cities.
Yes. So I recommend that you also include the current monopolists as a stakeholder.
Okay.
The reason is that with two reasons. First, I think they currently exist. I am not in favor of monopolies or anything like that. Please don't get me wrong. But they exist for a reason today, right?
Yes, sir.
And it will be important to understand what those reasons are. See, in our work, for example, on farm soil testing and fertilizer management, what we have found is that while a retailer is often very exploitative and is often also captured by the fertilizer companies to push their own products to the farmer in large amounts and so on, that you do see that. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, sir.
But we also realize that these, in many villages and rural settings, the retailer's shop is the only place that is sturdy enough to store anything. So retailer is also a very important component in the reliable supply chain. You know, whether we like it or not, it is like that.
Yes, sir.
Also, we realize that many retailers you do meet retailers who are actually not trying to be exploitative. But they often feel that I have no choice because everybody does it and I have to do it, and there's no option and all that. And so it has definitely occurred to us that can you, or not just occurred to us, our solutions are definitely thinking about making them a part of the solution. See, listen, I mean, a monopolist or a retailer uh, only cares about their revenues. As long as they get their revenues, even if it is slightly lower and all that, as long as they get a revenue stream going, and you are trying to do something more correct from the perspective of the inputs to a farm, if they get their revenue, they'll be okay. I mean, so you do meet such people. So I would recommend that you also interview them and don't avoid them.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, Ayush, go ahead. Yes, that you'll be the last one we'll take, and then we'll go on.
Yeah, sir, basically our topic is distribution of knowledge. Basically in this, sir, you talked about we have such a inequality in material world, but you want to reduce that inequality in the information world, right? So,
Yeah.
sir, Srishti has so much knowledge, but we are trying to share that knowledge to everyone. Now that should be shared to. So we thought of it a way was we could use this internet boom in India, right? अगर आज
Yeah.
सबके पास phone नहीं है, but in the future everybody will have a phone, right? And everybody will have an internet connectivity. So we thought of making an app. That's the biggest impact you could create. So the stakeholders in this are farmers, general workers, Srishti itself, grassroots innovators from which the innovations we are taking. We could also take some urban people because there are a lot of people who come from town, who migrate from town to cities and who are still who believe in this type of who believe in these type of innovations. Like for example, Ayurveda's innovation and जैसे हमारे all grandmothers and mothers, right? Even though we couldn't connect with it, but our mothers and grandmothers do. So those are also an or type of stakeholders. So yeah.
Yeah. See, I think your challenge is I understand where you're going with it, and this is not a criticism. I am just trying to help to go to the next step. Okay, so please hear me in that way. I think the main challenge is, see, here the problem is who is not a stakeholder. That's the problem in this case, right? Because everybody may want this kind of knowledge at some or the other level. So what you may want to find is you may want to find who are those early adopters, or who are who are really yearning for this knowledge. Because see, what you will see is that almost in any adoption, be it WhatsApp or be it Google or the internet itself or whatever, there are those who are really enthusiastic and who are the early adopters. Electric vehicles we are now seeing, for example, hybrid vehicles. There are early adopters. Then there's going to be the mass market. And then there is going to be the laggards, or the people who will adopt it the last. They will hold on to what they have currently until the very end, and then they will jump. So you want to find this early adopter type of a category, right? So I mean, your sort of quest takes me to some thinking about the scriptures. For example, in our scriptures, for example, people believe that there's really three types of quest, right? There is the people discuss something there's a childlike curiosity. Oh, what is it? How is it? Where is it? Why is it? The answer probably don't matter to them as much, but they are asking questions all the time. Wonderful. It's lovely to see. Then there is the second level of quest, which is like intellectual curiosity. Oh, what's happening to China's economy or whatever, It doesn't really affect your life probably as much. I'm giving China's example. Take Sri Lanka, for example. It doesn't affect your life, but it's an intellectual curiosity type of question, right? But the third level of question is, one where by people for whom life itself depends on answer to such questions. So, for example, if somebody is dying of thirst in the desert, they ask for water. They're not asking for water for intellectual curiosity or childlike curiosity. They are asking because they will die if they don't have the water, right? So I think finding that those early adopters in each of these domains, be it young people, children, whatever, grassroots innovators are probably the entire bunch is like that. But it would be a good way to narrow down, because otherwise you will end up with stakeholder categories that, I mean, you will have challenge of you will have the opposite challenge, that who is not a stakeholder. Like everybody is a stakeholder here. So that's one observation.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So in this case, we have farmers and workers in that sense.
Yeah. So in the farmers' case, generally every region has a set of progressive farmers, who are willing to experiment more than the rest. And those are the ones who are probably your early adopters.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. And Srishti knows many of them. So you should have no dearth of talking the ones you could talk to. So
Thank you.
okay. All right. Okay. Let's move along. Okay, so this is the journey. Let me tell you now about the early part of this journey, right? Where we went from literature to actually talking to stakeholders and deciding likely use cases and so on. So what we found was that water quality monitoring is actually prerequisite to doing water management, but it is also a regulatory mandate. The regulatory mandate today is that every source of our country, every single water source, needs to be tested once in 3 months. So think about 660,000 villages, 3 to 5 water sources per village. This may be a hand pump like the one you see here, which has gone bad, so somebody has put a cross on it. That is how you sort of decommission, some water sources. So it may be a well, it may be a river, whatever it is. But the water sources, there are about 1.8 or so million water sources in just, if you just say, 3 to 5 per village, you get about 2 million water sources. In total, there are about 14 million water sources. And about 8.4 of them have ever been tested, and then 2 million of them have chemical contamination of some sort. So what we had found in our research was that if you look at the physical, biological, and chemical contamination, it is really the biological contamination is ubiquitous. So it is everywhere. Like Nitish, I think you were talking about your technology. Biological contamination you are going to find in every village of our country, or even in the urban areas. I think when there is piped water, it goes down a little bit, but it's there everywhere. Chemical contamination is kind of limited to regions. The challenge is biological contamination you can get rid of by boiling water. If you have the energy sources like wood and all that to boil it, you can get rid of biological contamination. Do people do it? People don't do it unless somebody at home actually gets sick, because even getting wood for firewood for boiling water itself is a 2-hour, 3-hour journey every day. So, people don't boil water every day. But if they need to, they will boil it. They can get rid of biological contamination. Physical contamination, which is this physical kachara, you can put, what people do is they put multiple folds of cloth and pour water through it, and that takes care of a lot of the physical contamination. But chemical contamination is something that's difficult to see, is very it can be very fatal, and it's very hard to remove. And so they also come in a great variety. But So currently what happens is, the paradigm for monitoring water is that you could field test water. For example, there are these portable kits that are available. Even in Indian villages, when we work, we see these kits sometimes. Sometimes this Jal Sahiya is there. The Jal Sahiya can do this test. The sensitivity of the test is limited. Fidelity is limited. So it can have about 30-40% error type of, that's what I mean by that. Alternative is that you take samples. This is the dominant method. You take samples and you send it to a lab. The lab may be at a block level, it may be at a district level, it may be at the state level, and depending on what you're trying to test. Sensitivity of a lab is high. Transportation is hard in many cases. Many villages, just taking a sample from village to a lab is about 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers. The person who is designated to take it is actually a volunteer, is of a village water and sanitation committee. So they don't get paid to do that. So this doesn't really get done. You know, some seasons are hard to do all of that, right? So essentially the bottom line is that there is very little testing that in effect takes place. But this is the current paradigm. So what we had done in our work was that we had really actually first mapped the institutional setup of sanitation, water quality, and health, all three. So let me just focus on, these three are managed by three different departments in our states. And so unfortunately, while it has been very well documented that sanitation affects water quality, which affects health, the management of all three is separate. And so they only talk once in 6 months, or if there's an outbreak. Or so right now, for instance, there may be a lot more conversation between them, because although, you know, COVID is not exactly a waterborne disease, but still in outbreaks there's more conversation, but without outbreaks they work separately. But think about just water quality per se. So there is the village water and sanitation committee, which is usually a part of the panchayat. Then the gram panchayat. So this village water and sanitation committee is responsible for sample collection, and these panchayats come under sub-divisional laboratories. These are block level laboratories. There may be one or more, which are then under the district level laboratories. The district level laboratory may be under zonal laboratories. So multiple districts are sort of clubbed into a single zone, and that comes under the state level laboratory. So with this we were mapping Gujarat, for example. Gujarat has one more body on top of it called Gujarat Jal Seva Training Institute, or GJTI, and then got Gujarat Water and Water Supply and Sewage Board. So that's the Gujarat setup. Now, what you see is that at the village level, you have field test kits, as I was showing earlier. At the block level, you can do some 16 or so elements. So you can do the E. coli bacteria for biological contamination. You can do several chemical contaminants test. But beyond that, you do have to go to a higher laboratory. Now, when it comes to trace contaminants, these are contaminants that are in very, very tiny quantity, and yet are very, very detrimental. To test them, you need spectroscopy machines that are in millions of dollars, and therefore there is only one lab typically in a state that can do it, and that's in the state capital. For example, in Maharashtra, we've been working with one. There's a single lab in Mumbai. So trace contaminants actually don't get tested because they are really hard to test in local laboratories. And then sending sample to the district, the state level lab is also hard. And so they don't get tested. So what we had done in our work was we really walked with these water samples through this entire chain. So we actually became the people, like Village Water and Sanitation Committee people, who would do the testing. So we actually took samples, we would ride motorcycles and go to block level laboratory, perform the test alongside. If needed for certain contaminants, go to district level laboratories, perform those tests, and then from there go to state level laboratories and perform those tests, and alongside document that whole process and all of their pain points, just to understand why water testing has been so hard. I understand that in the summer school setup that you are in, this may or may not be possible for all problems, but in all of our problems, we actually trace the current process fully. We walk with the thing. So for example, in the soil testing work, we actually perform soil. The first things research students who work with me, and me also, I mean, I go with them. We actually collect soil samples, composite samples. We test them on the farm if there is a field test kit. And we have realized, for example, in soil testing, that it took 2 PhD students from MIT and me 2.5 hours to test soil using soil test kit on the farmer's soil. And so we realized that, wow, there's really no chance that farmer is going to do this on sustained basis, you know. And so, but basically we walk with the process. So feel free to do that. That's really an important thing to do. So let me see. Okay. All right. Keep going. How much time do I have? I have 16 more minutes. All right. Okay. So I'll speed up a bit. And we are asking all along, we're asking question, who are the stakeholders for the paradigm that we're trying to understand? I told you stakeholder is the one who either affects or is affected by your solution. What are their pain points? So we don't really tell them what we have imagined as a solution until very late into the process. We just gather their pain points because we really want to understand what are they facing, how are they solving the problem, rather than biasing them with what's in our mind, right? And for doing that, for uncovering this unbiased truth, we deploy a lot of methodology from human-centered design and anthropology tools, so that we have confidence in what it is that we are gathering, and then we also try to come up with a understanding that what part of this puzzle can you take up that they themselves can't take up very easily? Because I don't really need to do what they can do, you know. I need to solve something that they themselves can't solve, the piece of the puzzle, easily. So that's the exercise we do. One of the things that I do want to, this is a picture from Maharashtra, that I do want to show is that many times we are talking about a solution that they have never seen. And so to have them imagine a solution becomes very, very hard because they don't have the exposure to imagine what you're trying to show them. So we also do a lot of work on mock-ups. And so in this case, for example, although we were going to build a trace contaminant sensor, I am carrying a pH meter for water. So I would to show people that, you know, you can press a button and you will know the pH of the turbidity of the water. And then everybody will run to their villages and bring their own water samples and they want to test and all that. But it will get a conversation going. Sometimes in government offices, what happens is that the top person of the lab will round up all of their scientists and everybody and say, we're all going to sit in this fancy conference room, and then he or she starts to speak, and everybody stays quiet. So when that happens, we take out these mock-up prototypes, and the moment a prototype is out, scientists and engineers go crazy, and the bureaucrats stop talking. So we get a lot of interesting conversation going. So feel free to use these props as long as you're not biasing people. Right. One other thing I should also tell you is that in water quality work in particular, don't tell a person that your water is bad unless you can tell them how to fix it, because otherwise they will be just worried for the rest of their lives. So that's just one thing caveat to take care of. Okay, so what we arrived at was that the trace contaminants are a global concern. You can see the concern about it in America, in China, in the in India, Borneo, whatever, in the UK, Brazil, etc. So trace contaminants is a big problem. They are difficult to detect, and they can be very dangerous. So we worked with several NGOs and labs and so on, we figured out that what the current monitoring framework is and why trace contaminants are not being taken care of. Further, we found that the main reasons were that the instruments were limited. They were either inaccurate or non-existent. It was difficult to send samples on, as I was mentioning, and there was no there was no testing of viruses or protozoas in many regions, and the opportunity was to preserve and forward some chemical information. We tried biological also, but haven't succeeded yet. In some form, so that it can be taken to the lab. That was sort of the earliest understanding. Now, think about the trace contaminants. Let me just a little bit of background here. So things like arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, mercury, nickel, zinc, this is what is called the trace contaminants. As you see, their concentrations are very, very, very small. Arsenic is 0.01 parts per million cubic liters of water, and so but their effect is devastating. So kidney diseases, cancer, and so on. And so if you go to the eastern part of our country, particularly the Gangetic Basin, arsenic, for example, is a major problem, but detecting it and fixing it has been challenging. Okay, so we decided to take on the trace contaminants. We realized that can we cut this idea of going to a lab and replace it with this dry sampling, which I was telling you about earlier, like a paradigm where we just post the contaminants. That's what we decided. That was the early conception. Now let's look at how did that come about somewhere in this middle of this diagram, right? So just looking at the feasible options and so on. So what we found was that from our analysis, users told us that they want something. What we realized was that this device that we are going to create will have to absorb sufficient amount of material of this contaminant so that it can be transported. It will need to preserve this contaminant in a form in which it can be analyzed. It will need to have a geometry conducive for it to be sort of posted, and it would need to use commercially available material so that it can be done at a low cost, because you can produce it at a volume, and it should be ubiquitously available. So we tried for both cation and anions. So we got the iron oxide serogel for the anion preservation, that is for arsenic and so on. And then we use the ion exchange resin for the cation preservation. So these contaminants that we were looking at can be addressed. Let's see. Yeah, these ones can be addressed. Both, all of them can be addressed. We have so far demonstrated only the cation, not the anion. So let's look at a video of how this works. I sent you an article about this, so you may have seen this video. Let me see. I think I'll have to share the right screen. I will come and share the screen. Let's see. Share screen. Share screen. Come on. Okay, trying to share screen. Okay. Do you see my screen now?
No, sir.
No, you don't see it. Okay, okay, all right. Okay, let us see here. Okay, is it coming through? Okay, I don't know why it's not coming through. Whoa. I'm trying to show you the video of the device that we ultimately built. Yes, you see it now, right? You see it now?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, good. All right. So, so basically, this is like a propeller. It's like what we use for making charge, just like a propeller, which you can put into the water sample at the source. So you take a sample from the source, like a liter of water in a village. You put this propeller with a sort of a plastic stick on top into it, and then you churn it for 10 seconds. And it has these ion exchange resin beads which basically exchange the element you are interested in. So currently we are building for nickel, cadmium, chromium, all of those elements. They jump onto the beads, and then you can take out the propeller and dry it in sun, put it in an envelope, and post it to a lab. And in the lab, you again put this propeller into an elevate like distilled water, again propel. And what it will do is those contaminants that you had absorbed, they will jump off into the distilled water, thereby giving you the sample as if you had collected it in the village. Right? Now, what we also found alongside was that recently we have now been able to reach an efficiency of this device where it absorbs 95 to 98% of contaminants of choice, thereby making the water itself drinkable, potable. Right? So that's what we built. Let's see. Now we have 4 more minutes. So I need to get you to the end as quickly as possible. I don't know where my thing goes away. I see. Why don't I just do that? I will share my entire screen so then there's no issue here. Okay, you see my screen now. Okay. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, good. So what we have seen is if you put the concentration that is in the original sample on x-axis, and then the recovered concentration after dry preservation, we are very close to 90+% for variety of contaminants. Also, if you put months on the x-axis and the fraction that you can recover at the lab, up to 12 months you can recover 90+% of contaminants. So this basically is the device that we have now built and we are commercializing through an entity called the Earth Phase. So basically, the bottom line is we started out with this initial concept of solution that is sort of analogous to dry blood spotting. Here are my friends Emily, Charlene, Rohit Karnik, who's a professor, Michael Bono, who was the postdoc, and then myself. We then focused on dry sampling of water contaminants and decision support system that as we will work on. There was technology side of questions and system side of questions. In other words, which water contaminants are of interest to dry preservation, storage and release. And on the system side, how do you provide decision support with increased water testing as you start using these devices? We use methods like concept selection and prototyping on the technology side, and the status is this device, and now in Earth Phase Analytics, which we're licensing the technology to this company, which we are forming with IIT Kanpur faculty and friends. On the system side, we did the institutional analysis of the wash sector and created an integrated database, which I have not shown you, which can show you sanitation, water quality, and health together. And there we formed now a group called Data for Improved Governance, or DIG, which can create tools for governments to use these databases. It hasn't had that much of an uptake because institutionally it's very hard to sell. That's another story we can go into, but that's where things are. So thank you so much, and happy to take any thoughts, questions quickly if they are there.
Hi, sir. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you. Amreen, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, I went to this ion exchange propeller. I think it's a very good discovery. So just want to know that, like, what is the means? How many times we can reuse this? And also, like, if they have been tested in the villages, like the water contamination will be more, so maybe it would require more ion exchange time or something related to the durability.
Yeah, good questions. So I think the first question. So this is what we have done is we have this is a single-use device, but then when you let me say it differently. When you use it and send it to the lab, because the lab recovers the resin by decontaminating it, it can recover about 60% of the resin. So you can recycle the resin. So a single propeller, one can say, has so 2 propellers can be used 4 times, for example. That's roughly the efficiency there, and I mean, or the sustainability from recycling reuse perspective. Sorry, and then currently the contamination levels that are being seen in India, we have a device. The device that we built should be more than enough for the ranges of contaminants that we have seen. So this problem of villages versus other places is it's there in calibrating the device, but it's not there in terms of the limits to the device. These have been tested in Ganga outside Kanpur, the field tested, and so there's some data from that. and they are now being tested in Sundarbans. So these are actually pretty remote villages. Other thoughts?
Sir, I wanted to ask, sir, there could be a very good chance of impurities from someone's hand. Means, like, for example, you're dipping it in a well, and the person touches the stamp. The dirt from that could transfer to the stamp, and then you test it. It comes out that it's 60% with a very good percentage of arsenic, but it was basically on other over a mine industry or like pesticide. He was working with pesticides.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, I don't know if I follow the question. Can you please ask, because you broke up a bit?
Basically, point is impurities from someone's hand could also go to the postcard, right?
Yeah. So this is not a. I mean, it's not a postcard, right? You saw that. It is this propeller. So postcard was the origin of the idea, but after a variety of form factors that we experimented with, the one that has worked the best is this propeller.
Okay, sir.
Now, your question about can contamination from somebody's hands cause interference of to the extent where your readings will be wrong, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we have we don't have the data for it. That's one thing I should say. But we have tested for interference quite aggressively, in the sense that we have produced scenarios of such interference. We have simulated scenarios of such interference by actually not really exactly touching something, but actually really changing the concentration sort of deliberately to see whether whether the device is robust against such interference. After, let's say, you churned it, you took it out, now your hand which has something is touching it. How much transfer of these cations will be there onto the beads, the ion exchange beads, resins. And in the lab conditions, what we see is the error is still within about 1%. In the field condition, we haven't done this interference testing.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Gayatri?
Sir, I have a question. Sir, as you gave an example of your work and how you narrowed down the activities on the lab and the field and continued with the task step by step. So we wanted to know that how to narrow it down and how to analyze and further, and what are the major points to be considered while narrow down the activities, because this is the area where I feel we are lagging in. So I wanted to know more about it.
Yeah, good question. A great question. So I think part of the there are really two aspects to narrowing down, right? One is how much time you have on hand to go after the problem that you are looking at. In our case, we had used a 2-year timeline, that in 2 years, can we do some proof of concept that will give us confidence that we can actually solve this problem in 5 years. That's how we thought about it. So that's one thing. The second is a question of, yes, you may narrow down, but it still has to remain meaningful, right? I mean, there's no point in slicing and dicing to the extent where the problem itself becomes meaningless. It's so narrow. And so there is that minimum viable challenge that somebody would care about if you solve. Is another question that's sort of the opposite side you want to think about. But the way to narrow down, first of all, is to not want to take on everything, but really find that gap where your contribution can do something that others can't do. I mean, the existing stakeholders and what is within their power and all that. It is not going to solve that piece of the puzzle. That's one thing. See, in this case, we actually started out at a case in point. We actually started out by saying that this device is actually going to be only for inter-lab. So what happens is, let's say I was showing you that hand pump which had a cross on it because somebody said it has bad quality. When a sample from that hand pump comes to a block level lab, they are the ones who know that they want to send this sample to the district level lab. We had originally envisioned that we will only provide this device to a block level lab so that they can safely send a sample to a district or a state level lab. So it will not be a consumer device at all. That's how we started, because that was the most controlled scenario piece of the puzzle. Because if it is a lab to lab, they know exactly how to handle it. And we don't have to go into education of people and all that, although it be very ambitious and glamorous to give it directly to people, which will happen now, but it has taken 6 years to get there, Initially, for the first 2 years, our thought was, can we even simplify the lab to lab transfer of samples for testing trace contaminants? That is from a block to a state. So pick that piece of that. So really work hard and go crazy about picking that meaningful piece of the puzzle that can be solved in a given amount of time. I think even though the summer school itself may be a few weeks, what I would recommend is that you still keep in mind that can you solve it in 2 years? Go with that perspective, and then you may come up with a prototype within 2 weeks, 3 weeks time in the summer school, which becomes inspiration for your 2 years work. That's one way to think about it. I don't know whether this is still too abstract or, there's really this is really problem finding or narrowing down the problem. And these are skills that you can learn by doing, hierarchical decomposition is one way to do it. Breaking down the big question into small questions is another way to do it. But it's essentially some form of reductionism at play, which we do all the time.
Okay, sir. So thank you. I guess I got the answer and the solution where I start. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sure. Nitish, you're going to say something?
Yes, sir. In your PLOS 1 publication, sir, you have been you have mentioned in conclusions, and I think you said this thing that there's a need of this biological contamination point of use back sensor. So are you currently working on such a system, like in a single day test? Maybe is it electrochemical based or assay based? Just want to, very curious about it, because you also understand that this is such a prime issue of the whole world.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So it is a combination of an electrochemistry based approach plus a concentration using filter type of an approach. Our idea there was basically, can we eliminate the 48 hours incubation period? So just for the benefit of everybody. So when you test for biological contaminants, what happens is that you take a sample and then you grow the colony like an E. coli, for example, in petri dish. And that growing the colony to a certain number when you can begin to detect it takes 48 hours. And therefore, knowing that your water is bad with E. coli and all that takes about 2 days minimum, 5 days in general, because rural places are far away and all that. We were trying to see that incubation step, can it be eliminated? That's what we were going after. We tried these methods of concentration plus electrochemistry. Some success, but so far we haven't really succeeded, to be honest. I mean, it requires at least 2 more years of work to get anywhere reliably. That is, where in a point of view study, see the vision there was, we also built a simulator for people to learn about water contamination in villages. We were working with Pradhan, which works with many villages. And the idea was that if they can do a training program, that is a behavior change program, put children through that program or adults through that program, and on the side, this test can go on, which in 2-3 hours will show that their water actually has biological contamination. How wonderful would it be? That was the concept. But we haven't technologically succeeded.
I was thinking maybe using electrocoagulation or membrane technology for, say, selective permeation. I think membrane technology for selective permeation will easily separate out certain, say for a sample if we take, and then we know the particle size, sorry, the MWCO of the what is that, bacteria, and I think that can be easily filtered in ultrafiltration. So that can be immediately tested and then checked. I'm just suggesting, sir, please correct me.
I don't know. I think you're right. I mean, I think you're very right that this could be an approach. But that approach in practice, like for instance, we got a patent on it, but we haven't really been able to make it, bring it to a level of efficiency where somebody would, where we can make it a field-based device. So at least for now, I have to say that we have some ways to go for us, in our lifetimes.
Can I connect? I mean, can I ask? Can I mail you regarding this SODES project, which I'm trying to?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You have my email address, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Other thoughts? Chintan, are we done? This is break time.
Sir, in your this ACS public, I think, in ACS publication, in this in their supporting documentation, sir, you have this this diffusion study you performed, sir, and I was wondering that, see, because in transport, in transport phenomena, when we define this certain say study model for this the chemical reaction studies or say diffusion model, how do you come to know that this model will work? Because there is a lot of uncertainties, because there is a it's not single solution. See, I think maybe I can express my problem, sir, because there is just not a single contamination which we'll be modeling in this mathematical model. It will be biological contamination, chemical contamination, as well as physical contamination, and I think they are correlated with each other to a greater extent. So when we this model seems perfect, but I'm just asking that how we are sure, we are very sure about it.
Yeah. Wait a minute. I don't know if I know which reference are you talking about. Which reference are you talking about, Nitish?
Yes, in this solid extraction, this SCPST80.
Yes, I see. Right. Yeah. Okay. Do one thing. Email me, because I think that will be too detailed for this crowd for the moment. But email me, and we'll chat further. How's that?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Because I think we are also over time, and I don't want the next session to be bumped because of me.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. Sure. Yeah. I look forward to your email. Yeah. Okay. So where do we? Who's the in charge now for the next session? Do we know, or do we take a break, or what happens?
Yes, sir.
We have a 12 o'clock lecture of PVM Rao.
Okay, I see. Right. Okay. So PVM is coming in. All right. Well, say hello to him.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Chetan.
He's right now not here.
Okay. All right. I see him speaking through his thing. Okay. So I will log off. All the best to all of you. I'm sure these projects would be fun. They sound like great projects. So enjoy your summer school.
गाइस हम 5 मिनट का ब्रेक ले रहे हैं. 5 मिनट के बाद प्रोफेसर पीएम राव का लेक्चर है. सो गुड आफ्टरनून सर। प्रोफेसर और चेतन भाई अभी अवेलेबल नहीं है। प्रोफेसर का एक दूसरा लेक्चर चल रहा है, सो आप अभी लेक्चर शुरू कर दो सर, आपका जो था।
हाँ, चिंतन वैष्णव का हो गया?
हाँ, हो गया।
हो गया, ठीक है। सो सभी फ्री है अभी?
हाँ।
ओके ओके, सो व्हाट आई विल डू इज, मैंने एक्चुअली 2 वीडियोस भेजा था। आई सेंट 2 वीडियोस. I don't know whether people watched that or not. If people have watched, they can ask some questions before I start. Are there any questions for those videos? Case study which I did. Okay, there are more messages. So dear students, any comments on the case study? Did you find time to watch, or you didn't find time? चेतन,
यस सर।
उनको कोई अनम्यूट तो नहीं करना पड़ेगा if they want to
नहीं
speak?
नहीं, वो उनके हिसाब से आपको जो क्वेश्चन होगी वो अनम्यूट कर सकते हैं।
ठीक है, गुड। Okay, I just wanted to check.
और सर वो लोग का प्रोजेक्ट अभी माइंड मैपिंग पे पहुंचा हुआ है सबका, और स्ट्रक्चर क्रिएट कर रहे हैं सब। अभी वो पॉइंट पे पहुंचे हुए हैं।
ठीक है। नो, मैंने एक जो वीडियो भेजा था, आई डोंट नो वो आपने फॉरवर्ड तो किया होगा? नहीं
सर, एक्चुअली मेल पे तो नहीं आया, आपने प्रोफेसर को भेजा था?
सृष्टि पे ही भेजा था।
सृष्टि भी भेजा था।
2-3 दिन हो गए। ठीक है, अगर forward नहीं किया हो तो probably they may not have any this thing. So what I'll do is I'll actually give them some inputs. जो last time what we discussed, some of the questions which have come related to prototyping and solutions. So I thought I'll give some more inputs related to that in today's session. Before that, if there are any questions from any student, they can always ask. Just there. I'll give them 30 seconds and then I'll start. Okay, are you to see me? I think so.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, let me give a few more inputs, particularly related to prototyping and how to go about selecting the solutions. So this is generally what we do for our prototyping sessions also. Generally when we start prototyping, the student projects, we do this. Okay. So one thing is often we have found that students think that some people can do a good projects and some people can't do a good project. But the few tens of thousands of projects which we have guided, I have not seen any such this thing. We found that everybody can do a good project. It only depends on how much passion and time you want to give. And one thing which is important is that also, particularly in prototyping projects, it's very difficult to get first version of the prototype exactly what we wanted prototype to do. So there will be failure, and particularly in inclusive innovation and innovation itself, one fail and fail fast. Faster you fail, faster you learn, and you come up with your next prototype which is there. So that's a bottom line for the innovation. And people often think that going for a very complicated solutions with very high technology is what is generally appreciated and required, but not true. We found that many successful innovations have very simple solutions and very easy to use products and solutions. So think for as simple a solution as possible. And this anyhow, the projects which you are doing. I think in the COVID situation, you may have to do some homework as to see what can be assembled and manufactured with available resources. You may have to figure out. And also assess market as many times as possible, either online or physical, whatever is the option available. And this is another very interesting statistics. In the student projects which we see, which students do particularly at IIT, the students who have visited more number of times the market have come up with very good products. I don't know why is that, but that's usually true. And this is very important since it's a team-based project. How you do a project management and divide your work becomes very important. And usually, if one link in a chain becomes a weak, the entire project becomes a weak. So it's very important that each one has a specific work to do, and that is done very well. This thing, more than project management, time management is even more important. And people able to do these two have come up with very good projects. And your project also requires physical and intellectual. This has to be planned in advance. Particularly, suppose I want to consult an expert, you may think that my prototype will be ready on such and such date, and after that I'll call and find out the availability of a person. Usually the person may be available a week after that. So it's always better to plan for physical and intellectual resources in advance, and that's an important aspect. This is the most important thing. Usually people come up with solutions just before the deadline, and that's not a good idea. So it's better to come up with solutions ready at least a week before, so that there is enough time for testing, which is there. So these are the general guidelines which we follow for any innovation and product building exercises and prototyping. And these would be handy for you also. Sometimes what I said may not be evident unless you go through this particular process, which is there. Okay, and this is even more important. Is the good projects are those which kind of went through testing, and they go through a cycle of what is called as design, build, test, fail, and then modify. So the more the iterations which happens, the better the project is. And this is a worldwide phenomena. It's not just something. It's a very common that if somebody has come up with only version 1 of a product, it will still have a lot of limitation. If you have come up with version 2, some of the limitations have been removed. Version 3, even further. So it all depends how you would like to do it. Okay. The other thing is, how do you communicate during a project is also very important. When we say communication, it is not just communication of only the words, oral or speaking. Communication also includes technical communication and visual communication. And we have seen that the people who spend some energy there are able to get feedbacks and discussions very this thing. I'll just give some examples. Suppose often when you're doing, you are coming up with some particular this thing, you'd like to sketch. And if I'm talking to an expert or let's say a user or another colleague, then such sketches are very handy. Describing such things using purely words actually is very, very ineffective in many cases. So see that in your team there are people who can probably do this also, this communicating. In fact, everyone is expected to do this particular aspect. So it can be in the form of sketches which you do, or sometimes it can be in the form of last time we discussed prototypes which are not functional. For example, like somebody who was actually making a coffee maker came up with this particular prototype in styrofoam. Okay. So what happens is even this, which is not a working product, still gives a lot of ideas as to how to improve if you actually take it to somebody who uses a coffee maker. They can tell, oh, controls need to be shifted, this should be there, and this looks ugly or this looks better, kind of a thing. So these prototypes can be made purely by hand in many cases. You don't need this thing. You just need simple tools and styrofoam to do that. Even people have made like a complete drill using a styrofoam. And you can even test for your palm geometries, etc. And how well it fits into your palm can also be tested using such models, though it is not a functional product. These days, laser cutting is also available. So if you have a variety of sheets, either laser cutting or plasma cutting or router, you can cut metal, plastic, and quickly assemble. Like this is something which has just, sometimes we just laser cut and just assemble, join the laser cut parts, the acrylic, etc., using simply chloroform. Chloroform is a adhesive for joining the acrylic parts, etc. Even like this is a prototype which is made in cardboard, but it still gives you some inputs to test your product in terms of certain aspects, not all that. For example, this cannot be tested for how much load it can carry, but it can be tested how well it fits into your body, and others can be tested using prototypes such as this. There's another cardboard prototype. Cardboard prototype can be very easily made easily available. It's only like cut, paste, glue, fix type of a thing. In fact, somebody can make a very complex prototypes using cardboard. Like this is a cardboard prototype made. This is basically the bread toaster, which is made in cardboard prototype. And though it will not actually toast the bread, but it can give you a lot of inputs as to how the product works, how to improve it, where it's going to fail, etc. Even people make in wood sometimes, because wood is easy to shape in multiple ways compared to metal or a plastic kind of it. So that is important. And markets is something which you would like to access as many times as possible. But please, one thing you remember, that before you go to market, exactly plan what is the purpose of visiting a market. Okay. Why I am saying is, most of the students, they actually get cheated in the first time, because you go and ask, they give you something, you really do not know this is what I want. When you come back and try to do that, it doesn't. For example, somebody wants to buy, let's say, aluminum sheet. So if you go and ask for aluminum, they'll give you a sheet. But aluminum comes in 50 different forms. Some are very strong, some are not so strong, some are very expensive, some are not so expensive. So if you go and say aluminum, whatever they have, they'll give, but it's not. So you should look at how to order, what are the different type of aluminiums which I need to, what is that which is fitting my requirements, should be very well known kind of thing. And there is also a very interesting process of material selection. I think all the projects who are doing physical products would also have to face what material to use. Okay. So how do we decide what material? Sometimes we decide purely based on our common sense, but there is also a systematic methodology to select the material. So what is generally done in material selection is that you have to list out all the material properties which are required for successful functioning of that particular component. So first step is, you see what is the component for which you are selecting a material, and what are the different properties it requires. Should the material have high strength or a low strength? Should it be thermally conductive or not? Or should it be transparent, or should it not be transparent? Should it be environmentally I don't know, degradable or not. So you can put as many properties as possible. But there are also very good guides. If I tell these properties, there are databases which can pick you right material for you. So this is a more systematic approach to material selection. Often it is also selected through past experience and judgment. But the students who neither have a past experience or a judgment may find these databases. Look at in the Google and YouTube what are the material databases available, and which will also give you a process of how to select a material for a given component. And then you go to probably a market and say, hey, I want aluminum sheet 6063, maybe more specific, which is. And you also need to probably do electronics, like these days. First prototype is always made using Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, etc. If you have in resources, it's good. Otherwise, you can actually order it little in advance. I'll also tell Chetan to keep some of the commonly used electronic subsystems or components in the library. For example, there is no harm in having Arduinos, a few Arduinos in the library, so that people don't have to order and they can quickly build a prototype. If not this time, maybe next time. But I think we do. For example, in our makerspace, we have Arduinos and others which students can go and pick any time, so that you don't have to order some of the commonly required electronics. And if any Delhi teams are there, and if they need any of these components, let us know. We can actually provide these from our library of elements also. You can come and pick from the makerspace if you are in Delhi. That is also possible. Okay, so this is my first portion. Before I go to the second portion, I thought let me just take a few questions related to that, and then I'll go to the second portion. Okay, Wasim has also typed a few words. Maybe Wasim would like to say color, psychology, ergonomics, aesthetics, sustainability, nature, impacts. Wasim, you want to say something about this? What do you mean? Is Wasim there?
Yes, sir, he's typing.
Okay. Yeah, so what Wasim is actually saying, that should we look at color, aesthetics, etc. before choosing a material? The answer is certainly yes, because if some of the material databases also give you properties which are related to aesthetics and other aspects. For example, one of the material databases uses tactile finish. That means how do you feel when you touch this particular product? So it actually basically classifies material in terms of better tactile finish, etc. So you can also use that. But please remember that a lot of these things, color, aesthetic, ergonomics, etc., they also come when you do design and manufacturing particularly. For example, what kind of finish the product will have depends on what method of manufacturing you use. And color also can be given. For example, I can even color the product or paint the product in whatever color I want. So though I may buy let's say a common white plastic, but I can always color it to give a color even at the prototyping stage. It can also be done at the manufacturing stage. So those are important. Those are very important when you're actually presenting your product. So users would basically look at all these aspects when they make their choices. So these are extremely important. And also sustainability, which you mentioned. That means whether the material is recyclable, is it reusable, is very, very important. And for example, the material selection databases and software also tell you which materials are recyclable and what is the percentage of recyclability. These data is also available now easily on the net. So Wasim, you are right that these are very, very important, but all these aspects may come either at not only at the material selection stage, but when you are actually making your design choices as well as choices for the manufacturing. So if you really look at design, material and manufacturing, it is like a triangle. Okay. So like design and material, there is a relation. Design and manufacturing, there is a relation. Manufacturing and material, there is a relation. So if you are able to understand this triangle, design, material and manufacturing, you are one of the best designers in the world. Okay, so just keep that. And Srishti said there's also certain apps for prototyping. So can we use them for getting our outputs? Apps for prototyping. I'm slightly confused. So there may be those may be for digital prototyping, but I have not seen apps for physical prototyping. How do you do physical prototyping using app? Maybe Sakshi can refine her question before I go to. Okay, then Vedika says, sir, we also have to consider availability of material for manufacturing of a product. Not all materials would be available. So when we do a material selection, one more thing which we do is that instead of arriving at, let's say, one material which is suitable for a given application, sometimes we may come up with 3 and check out of these 3 which is available. So you don't have to always say, I'll always go for only one material and search for this material in the world wherever it is available, whatever may be the lead time to get this material. So that's not a good strategy. You say that, okay, I have 3 options of using a material for a given application. Let me go and find out on the net or from the market which is available. Since all 3 are suitable, so anyone which is available, I'll just go and use that particular aspect. So definitely, Vedika, that material selection aspect is very important, which is true. Okay, any further questions? Sakshi, I didn't get your question. Can you say or can you type or? Okay. So Sakshi is saying, I mean that circuit design and testing, few applications are available. Yeah. I think a lot of, see, when you are actually trying to do probably electronics, the options are that your first prototype would be more using breadboards, Arduinos, etc. Maybe subsequently, when it actually goes for manufacturing, you would like to have a PCB. So you can think of, do you need a PCB at this stage, or do you just have to do that? If you are able to put your circuit, there are also people who can make PCB and give it to you. And we have also got PCBs in, generally it takes a week, but now it may be even more. But we also had options where we got PCB in 3 days and 4 days, which are there. So you can look at whether you want to use the existing microcontrollers or you like to fully build a complete PCB. That is this thing, and there are online people who can do. So Wasim says, I also want to mention my personal experience, which is starting a few mock-ups with the help of Scratch found around, and which will help you to design things with available resources. Yeah, I think you can always do that. But what happens is when you're doing a mock-up, if you're doing a functional mock-up, then you can still use the same material. But if you're actually doing a mock-up just for look-alike, work-alike type of a mock-up, then material may still change because you may be using a soft material to just when you're making a look-alike prototype, it is purely for the form and aesthetic sometimes, may not be for the functionality, which is there. Okay, so these are the questions. Any more questions, or I can go to one more this thing. Last time there were a lot of questions that how do we select one solution when we have multiple solutions and kind of a thing. I wanted to give a small briefing on when you have multiple solution, how do you pick one? I wanted to cover something. I'll do it and probably I'll come back to questions again. Okay, let me go back. So generally what happens is the design thinking approach and innovation requires you to work with multiple solutions often. And when I have multiple solutions for the same problem, I need to actually check which one is probably the most suitable kind of. One way is that people sit, brainstorm, and then they come up with one of the solution that is very natural. But small tools and techniques would help you much better and will be able to arrive at this thing. For example, sometimes if you are building a product which are like somebody had a problem where you want to build a shelter for the salt workers in places like Kutch. So the number of things which you need to consider, maybe 50 things or maybe 40 things which are important to build this. When the solution comes, when you have like 4 solutions, out of these 40 things which are my parameters, so some of them may be fulfilled by one solution, maybe few others by another. So there is always a confusion, because if I have like 4 solutions, each of them are good in some respect and bad in respect. So which one I should go and select is always a question. So what we do is, as a part of our design and design thinking, we also use some small, very simple methods which anybody can use, not only for selection, but it can be used for others also. So one method which we generally use is what is called as a Puck's method. So in which what happens is, suppose if I have multiple solutions, I would like to test them based on only 3 parameters. is this solution feasible? Is this solution desirable by the users and stakeholders? And third is this solution will make a business sense? That means, will it actually really hit the market, etc. So if I take solutions such as this, I can say some are yes and some are no's. I can say, oh, okay, maybe I'll take all of them which have all the yeses and probably drop the no's. That may be one way to look at it. Or I'll take all the solutions which have at least 2 yes and proceed with that kind of thing. Yeah. So somebody wanted to say something. Let me come back. Anil? Oh, sorry, Professor Gupta. Okay. I'll go back to my slides. So this method of just, right now I have put 3, but you can put 10 instead of feasibility, desirability, viability. You can always put things, how easy to manufacture, or availability of materials. You can put any of those parameters to select a solution which is important for that. Or you can say that recyclability is more important, so I'll put recycling. So this could be 3, this could be 4, this could be 10, depends on how much you want. But this quickly eliminates, suppose if I have 10, 15 solution or 20 solution, I don't want to work with all of them for very long. I would like to quickly eliminate some of the solutions. So after this quick method, I may end up with 3, 4 or 5 or maybe 6 solution or 8 or 10 with which I would like to work. So this is one way to look at. But this is like too simple. If you want to go for a better method, then there is another method which is called as a Dominic method. So in Dominic method, what is generally done is all the filters. For example, somebody said recyclability. So you have to decide, is recyclability a very high priority filter for you, or a medium priority, or a low priority? Or cost of a product. Cost of a product, is it high, medium, or low? You can define. So you can choose as many filters as possible on the basis of which you would like to eliminate or select some of the product. And then you can do that. For example, let's say cost is a very high priority filter for me. And then I can see solution A, is the cost really very, very low? If it is low, then it falls into excellent. If the cost is very high, then it falls into one of these aspects. So depending on how well the cost, which is a high priority filter, I'll have entries in this. Somebody can say transportation. Somebody says transportation is not, let's say, in this, for my product, it's a medium priority filter. Then I can look at ABC, how well they are being satisfied. And then I can make entries A, B, C in one of them. So when you do that, you get entries such as this. Like here, if you actually look at, there have been four filters which have been selected and the entries are made. That is why you will see 4 A's, 4 B's, and 4 C's on this particular one. Now, looking at this particular chart, can we think of among the ABC, which is probably a better solution? Is solution A better, or solution B better, or solution C? Any guesses? Somebody said BC. Okay. Okay, good. BC, yeah. Okay. Good. So, so if you actually look at this particular one, A is not a very good solution. The reason is a very high priority filter or parameter which product is supposed to satisfy is being satisfied in an unacceptable manner, which is there. Whereas probably C is the best in this case. B may be the next, and A is probably the worst. So what happens is if you have this thing, your entries will be more on the top side and more on the more on the top side. If you see, that is one thing. It is possible that low priority filter can still be on this thing, but high priority filter should be generally be very good. So if you see C has 2 high priority filter, and both are being met excellent and in a good manner. So I can say that when I am actually confused between solutions, I can do small system. Look at for this particular solution, what are the things which are important, and how do I rate them on a matrix like this, and then take a decision. So this is called as a Dominic method. There is if you want even further refinement, you can do this. This is called Paul and Bees method. So you will take all the filters. You will not only say high priority or low priority, you can also give a weightages. You say that cost is most important for me, and I'll give a weightage of 0.35 or 0.4 or 0.25. So you can give, and weight should be given in such a manner that sum of these weights is always equal to 1. And here you can say, okay, solution 1, I can take filter 1 and it meets in a very well. I can again rank between 1 and 5. So suppose if I take solution 1 and the filter 1 is well met, it is 5, so I'll put 5 as a part of a solution or whatever it is. So this further is filled from 1 to 5. 5 means the filter is being met, this particular factors attribute is being met in an excellent manner. So I'll put 5. If it is not being met, then I'll put 1. So you rate it from 1 to 5. And then at the end, you can actually take the multiplication of this weight and which you have put, and you'll get a value out of rank out of 5. And then you can rank the product. So you can also do a weighted method in order to do that. And these are all done. In fact, these are the methods which are also used not only for this, even for others. For example, a magazine wants to know what is the best automobile year of the world, best automobile of the year, this thing. So then they say automobile should be judged based on these 150 parameters, and these are the stages. Take each of the automobiles which is competing, calculate these scores, and see which has the highest score, and then you give that an award of automobile of the year kind of. So these methods are universal. It can be used not only for this project. You can always use it for your other aspects. Whenever you have to compare anything in the life in future, you can always think of using these 3 methods which are there. Since last time, there were multiple questions, how do we select a solution? I thought I'll also give not only qualitative way, but also a quantitative way to select. And these Paul and Bees, Dominic, and Cook's method are this thing. You can choose whether it is easily, whichever, how much depends on how much effort you want to put and kind of a thing. So that's a second portion which I wanted to cover, and let me take questions, and if there are other topics which students would like to do, I'll also take that. So it's time for questions. Please go ahead. you can ask questions related to what we discussed, and also anything which is in general which you want to ask.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead. Sejal.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, we're working on the problem statement of building huts for the salt workers. So even though we can come up with, like, we can read up literature and see the previous experiences. However, is there any way we can make like a prototype of any sort? Because those materials are not accessible to us at all. Now can we visit the field? So what can we do in this case?
Yeah, so there are two ways to do. One is that probably you would like to first try to make a CAD model of the hut, correct? So a 3D model of that using the existing computational tools, and then you can also put whatever, because these days the 3D models which can be made, particularly CAD models, can be very realistic also. It depends on how much time you want to put. If it is only the geometry, or you also like to give texture, etc., it's possible. But once you make, then I suggest that you go through one round of feedback from the people, whether anything like this makes sense to them, which is there. And if people would come up with number of inputs, you can go back to your CAD and modify. And second time when you want to go, you can always make, let's say, a cardboard model of the thing and do the second iteration. That is possible. Which is that. So this time you may get further input. So I think that's a process which you follow. Yeah, Sejal, go ahead.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, sir. So we'll start off with the CAD model and then work our way with the inputs.
Yeah. This. Oh, okay. Vedika has typed a question. If a problem has existing solution, how do you tackle it in a better manner than what has been done previously? How do we measure our solutions against the ones available? Oh, I think that is also a possible. For example, in the methods which I mentioned, for example, where you are comparing your solution, you can also include solution which people have come up with earlier also. It is not necessary that you should compare only your solution. You can even compare with, for example, if there is an existing solution, I'll also make it one of the solution, and then I have an immediate comparison which is available. So the three limits which I mentioned need not be restricted to only the new solution. It can also have some of the existing solutions. So then you get a little clear picture as to how it is happening. And also one of the things which probably I forgot to mention is also, let's for example, there is like look at one solution which is not meeting in terms of feasibility, but then there are other solutions which are meeting. You can also think of whether solutions can be combined to make a new solutions. Maybe sometimes these combining of solutions would actually can give you a better way. It may eliminate in some cases the disadvantages of the both. So in that case, the new solution which comes up would be better than both the previous solution. And this is also applicable to modification of the existing solution. Suppose I know that the existing solution is very wonderful, it's working very well, there are no problems with the solution except that people are not able to afford this because it's very costly. Then you can also think of putting in efforts, your innovation efforts, to make that particular product affordable without changing much in terms of functionality, feasibility, etc. So you can also, the existing solutions can be modified to that. So generally what happens is, when we say innovation, design or innovation, what it does is it adds a value. So this value can be technical value, this can be aesthetic value, it can be a business value, sometimes it can be all of them. So you can take an existing solution and see where the problems are, and you can improve it, which is there. And a small improvement often helps. For example, there are a lot of examples in the real world, both inclusive innovation as well as this thing. For example, people said, if Amazon was there, what was the need for a Flipkart? Okay, so when Flipkart people studied the Amazon, they found that most of the people are happy buying products cash on delivery, and they found there is a gap. That gap is, people would like to first see the product and then only give a cash rather than giving advance money, and they came up with another small part of an innovation. So sometimes a small change in the existing one makes you to even very big ventures, etc. And that's how the Flipkart's business actually started. They found a very serious gap in the existing Amazon's type of a thing. So it could even be in that direction you can look at. And Sakshi says, among these methods, which method will give us better solution in detail? So we don't know, because how do you know if the solution which satisfies most of the criteria is the best solution? So we have to strive for that. Sometimes it may happen that there are 10 things to be satisfied by the solution. 9 are satisfied very well and 1 is not being satisfied. You can think of just modifying that 9th parameter. For example, you can say that it is meeting everything, but except that the material is not correct. So will the change of material would do a better, come up with a solution? Then I'll just go and change only the material. Rest of the things are all working fine. So I can do. People are not buying, or people are not able to use because of the material aspect. So let me just change the material. So it could be anything. So it's very difficult to say a priori which is the best solution unless you have done enough brainstorming and solutions, etc. Yeah, Chetan, you wanted to say something? Okay. Further questions? So how comfortable are you people with prototyping? Do you still see some unanswered questions in prototyping? Please flag them off, which is to. Yeah, Amreen.
Yes, sir. So actually, we are thinking to design a tool which will be ultra-sensor based, and it will be monitoring the crop diseases, food, infected foods, and the rotting vegetables. So, for that, we won't be able to buy or purchase an ultrasound now. So, how can we show it as a model or in a prototype form?
So what you're saying is that you don't have an ultrasonic sensor. Is that what?
Yes, sir. So what we have planned is to connect it to a mobile through USB, and it will be capturing the image. Further, it will be processing through algorithm, and it will be giving the data to the farmers whether it is a deceased one. So
Oh, you mean, are you saying how do I get the image data? Is that what you are saying?
no. Sir,
Huh?
how do we show a model of a sensor plus with a mobile, connected to a mobile actually. So that would be the first phase. So since we don't have a sensor right now with us, so then how
Okay.
we process with a mobile phone?
Yeah, but if you know that if you have a data which is captured by this sensor, at least you should immediately do the post-processing work. That means after the image is obtained, how do I make a decision, and how do I that part can be immediately done. In the meantime, probably you can obtain a sensor, etc. And I think sensors are also available. Are they not available online for you to deliver wherever you are?
Sir, I'm doubtful. Like within 10 days, if we can get it over here, because the restrictions still.
Okay. What is the sensor? Exact sensor?
Sir, it is known as a sensor probe, like ultrasound sensor probe, which we can connect to the mobile. So there are different companies which do market them. So we have to look at them individually.
So then what happens is if you know the sensor dimensions, etc., which may be available in online, you can incorporate that and go ahead and also try your interface with the mobile. So in other words, you have made a space for sensors to be put in your product. So that particular portion can be tested later. And also the data which comes from the sensor is also available for you, and rest of the things which you have proven. In other words, you have done some work about industrial design. That means how do the people use the mobile phone and this thing? How will they basically, how will this interface with the smartphone, etc.? Those have been done, and post data has been done. Only thing is sensor is missing, which I can actually put whenever it is available.
Okay, so actually we are looking for the database also. Like, so this is little something like ultrasound has only been done on the human. So we are still looking for the data where we can get the plant perspective as well. So then we'll be better able to show it in a model form and more accurate.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Nitish has a question. He says, how to do internal detailing? Internal detailing, what I'm actually understanding is that if you have a product, outside you can actually probably come up with how do you do the internal detailing. Internal detailing can also be done. Particularly, there is a lot of detailing which can be done, including internal detailing sitting in front of a CAD. So people can come up with fairly a complex detailing type of a product for this thing. For example, for that, one of the example which was shown was the hand drill. And if we actually open a hand drill, you'll see that the product has a very complex internal detailing, even in plastic. And people first attempt is to sit in front of a CAD and see that if I know what are the sensors and what are the things which have to be assembled, if I know their dimensions, then the detailing becomes very easy. You can also try some ways to optimize putting all the components so that you come up with a compact product which is also a requirement in most of the cases, which is there. But internal detailing can also be done even in the CAD. Maybe when you are actually building a prototype, like look-alike, etc., that time maybe internal detailing sometimes it can be skipped if because if you think that the feedback which you are looking at, internal detailing is not very important, you can only make the external form and take it to users and others. But if you think that internal detailing is also important for feedback, because users don't care how complex the product is internally, correct? For them, they're more interested in the functions, what kind of experience I'll have in using the product, etc. Internal detailing is to satisfy other requirements like assembly, compacting, manufacturing, and those aspects, material saving, etc. So user may or may not bother as long as they get a good experience of a product at an affordable price, kind of thing. So maybe sometimes internal detailing may not be required for the first level of feedback. Maybe it may be important subsequent levels. Okay, one of the questions which has come is, when functionality of product is high priority and work like prototype is not possible, to make it, to make like in case of farmers had what to do. So what we are saying is every prototype gives certain type of inputs. So if you think that what is the purpose of visiting, let's say, the farmers and to take their feedback, if that can be conveyed, if I make a CAD model, I'll probably, I can only show it to some people, maybe experts, etc., and take a feedback. If I have access to users, I may still do it. But if I have, let's say, a cardboard model, etc., then probably I can go to even users and others and tell that this is the layout and this is the configuration. This is where, let's say, things are going to put together. So every prototype has a certain merits, whether it's a digital or is it a physical. You need to make a selection. Keep why am I going to the, what is the feedback I am desiring from the people to whom I want to show. And if that output is possible through only CAD, you can do only CAD. If it requires physical model only, then you should do physical. If it can be done by both, then you should do both. All are possible, which are there. Okay, more questions? Yeah. So some of you have actually written the email also. Probably I'll respond to some of them today itself. Okay, last 2-3 days have been very busy for me, but I think I'll try to reply and send the information which some of you have asked, which I'll do it today. In the meantime, I'll also ask Nitish to forward that case study so that you can go through the case study and may have further questions. Because case study gives you a lot of answers to your questions, which I actually today said and in the last class, and many more things. Nitish, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, it was yes, sir.
So, could you find the file which I sent email with the, or you want me to send once more?
Sir, have you have you just sent?
No, I sent it as a list. If you want me to send it once more.
Send it to Chetan and we can share with everybody.
Yeah, I sent it. I'll send once more.
You can send it to Chetan. Mark to summerschool@sasti.org also.
Oh, okay. I didn't do that.
Summerschool@sasti.org. Please mark a copy there. So we will put it up on the Moodle so that it becomes available to this batch and the future batches.
Okay. So Chetan, just send the email. I'll reply to that. That may be both of them. That would be better.
चेतन एक मेल भेज दो समर स्कूल से भेज दो।
हाँ सर।
हाँ समर स्कूल के अकाउंट से एक मेल भेज दीजिए कसुराव।
हाँ
अभी भेज देना। Anybody else has any other issues before Professor Rao winds up? Anybody has any questions?
कुछ लोगों ने, some people have asked a specific this thing through email. I'll reply them today.
Hello. Hello. Chetan. 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 मैं आ गया लेकिन कोई है नहीं वहां पर और। अरे हाँ, लेकिन वो गए, प्रसाद राव गए।
सर है।
हाँ, प्रोफेसर राव इज ऑनलाइन। प्रोफेसर मधुसूदन राव को देख लेते हैं। नो आई डोंट। हाँ, हेलो, आई कांट हियर यू।
सर प्रोफेसर राव सर है, अभी ऑनलाइन ही है।
हाँ, वो लेकिन वो दिख नहीं रहा, उनकी आवाज नहीं आ रही ना।
नहीं
तो
ना,
उन्होंने क्या
आवाज नहीं आ रही है, शायद उनके वहाँ भी नेट चला गया होगा शायद, क्योंकि उनका माइक ऑन ही है अभी।
माइक ऑन है? हाँ, माइक तो ऑन दिख रहा है लेकिन
प्रोफेसर सर गए शायद, रीलॉगिन हो गए।
हाँ,
शायद रीलॉगिन हो गया अभी, क्योंकि एक्चुअली अभी यहाँ पे ऑफलाइन दिखा रहे हैं वो प्रोफेसर सर।
तो ऑफलाइन दिखा रहे हैं, तो ठीक है। तो लेट अस कम टू दिस डिस्कशन दैट वी वांटेड टू हैव। चेतन।
हाँ सर।
हाँ, उसकी चर्चा कर लेते। आदित्य है क्या? आदित्य तो लाइन पे नहीं दिख रहा मेरे को। अमरीन।
अमरीन भी ऑफलाइन है सर।
तो फिर कैसे डिस्कस करेंगे उस प्रॉब्लम को?
अमरीन आ गई सर।
हाँ, अमरीन इज हियर।
आदित्य को कॉल करके बता रहे हैं सर।
हाँ, कॉल कर लो उसको। तो अमरीन से बात करता हूँ जितने में। अमरीन
जी सर।
मेरा ये सुझाव है, क्योंकि ये आइडिया जो था वो उसने आदित्य ने सबमिट किया था जब उसने रजिस्ट्रेशन से पहले अपनी असाइनमेंट भेजी थी ना। ये जो डिजीज वाली थी, ये आइडिया मुझे उसी के असाइनमेंट में से पसंद आया था और हमने इसको डिस्कस किया था। तो थोड़ी बहुत तो मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग हो सकती हैं, कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है। जब हम लोग काम करते हैं साथ में तो हो जाते हैं ऐसे मोमेंट्स। बट द चैलेंज इज टू रियली allow enough diversity of views and perceptions and yet be able to get a good solution out. वो है challenge. So my suggestion would be that keep him in the group, discuss, and if necessary you have to follow two approaches. उसमें कोई बुराई थोड़ी है. One can try and work on multiple solutions also. And supposing your solution that you have suggested works better, so much the good. ठीक है ना? तो एक suggestion. I mean, what do you think? Is it possible?
Sir, actually, I would like to say something about this.
Please
and
go
the
ahead.
thing is that, sir, he did. I mean, I'm not pointing out that his plan is not good. And I also said that he can make another group because there many people are there in processing part, image processing part. So when we went through the literature, we were going through his plan only. But when we went through the literature, we found that lasers are having many drawbacks. And that is the reason we can shift to some other technique. And so that is why we brought ultrasound into picture.